My family tried to give away my new home in front of everyone. They didn't expect what I took back instead. The smell of fresh paint still clung to the air, sharp and clean, layered with the faint sweetness of catering food and cheap white wine. Our new living room felt unreal, too bright, too open, like a photograph that hadn't fully settled into reality yet. People stood everywhere, glasses in hand, laughing too loudly, congratulating us. This was supposed to be a beginning. Caleb's hand rested on my lower back, warm and grounding. He leaned in slightly, his voice low. "We actually did it," he said, almost like he was afraid to say it too loud. I nodded, swallowing the tightness in my chest. "Our first home," I answered. Years of saving. Saying no to trips. Working late. Choosing stability over comfort. Every square foot of this place represented effort, ours. Then came the sound. A fork tapped against a glass. Once. Twice. The room gradually quieted, conversations fading into polite smiles. I already knew who it was before I turned. My father, Raymond, stood near the center of the room, champagne flute raised, posture confident, comfortable in a space he'd never paid for but always felt entitled to occupy. His smile was wide, practiced, the kind meant to command attention. "A toast," he announced. Caleb's shoulders stiffened beside me. Raymond's eyes swept the room before landing on us. "To Elise and Caleb," he said, "to this beautiful new home, and of course, to family." There was a pause. A beat too long. "And speaking of family," he continued, smile widening, "they've decided to do something incredibly generous tonight." My stomach dropped. They've agreed to give their brand new appliance set, the refrigerator and washer-dryer combo Caleb's parents gifted them, to Mason, who needs it far more right now. For a split second, the room didn't react. Then applause erupted. People smiled at us, at a generosity we had never offered. I felt the blood drain from my face. Caleb turned sharply toward his father, then back to Raymond. "I'm sorry," he said carefully, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. Those appliances were a gift. We weren't." Raymond laughed, light and dismissive. "Oh, don't be difficult," he said, waving a hand. "It's just appliances. You two can replace them easily. Mason's situation is far more important." He had just dismissed my husband. In our home. In front of everyone. And something inside me, something that had bent and folded quietly for 30 years, went completely still. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't look at Mason, my younger brother, who was already smiling, already accepting congratulations for a prize he hadn't earned. Instead, I stepped away. My footsteps sounded too loud against the hardwood floor as I crossed the room. I passed gift bags, houseplants, framed prints, small hopeful offerings from friends who had shown up because they genuinely cared. Near the back, half hidden behind a stack of coats, was a modest paper bag. I reached inside. A single bottle of discount red wine. Mason's gift to us. No card. No note. I picked it up, turned it once in my hands, then walked back toward the center of the room. Raymond was still smiling when I stopped in front of him. He looked pleased with himself, like he'd just balanced a ledger no one else was allowed to see. I reached into my pocket and pulled out an empty envelope, one I'd found earlier on the entry table, left over from a birthday card. I placed it gently into his hand. "We thought this was more honest," I said calmly, "a better symbol of our relationship." The room went silent. Not awkward silence. Total silence. The applause died mid-breath. Glasses froze halfway to lips. Even the refrigerator, the one they just tried to give away, hummed loudly in the background, its steady noise suddenly impossible to ignore. Raymond stared at the empty envelope as if it had burned him. My mother, Carol, stood a few steps behind him. For the first time all evening, her expression cracked, not anger, not sadness, but confusion. Real confusion. And Mason. Mason looked lost. Like the script had changed and no one had given him the new lines. This wasn't new behavior. It was just finally visible. My entire life had been a quiet series of withdrawals. I was the capable one. The resilient one. Mason was the sensitive one. The one who needed support. Those were the roles. When I was 16, I spent an entire summer working outdoors, saving for a used car that barely ran. 6 months later, Mason, who was 17, totaled his brand new car after speeding through a red light. Within a week, my parents replaced it. A better model. When I needed help with tuition, Raymond gave me a lecture about discipline. When Mason wanted to find himself through a half-baked business idea, they funded it without hesitation. I was the co-signer. The backup plan. The quiet fixer. People always ask the same question, why didn't you just say no? Because when you grow up being told your value is in how much you endure, endurance starts to feel like love. Standing there in my living room, surrounded by witnesses, something finally broke free from that belief. Mason sniffed theatrically, drawing attention back to himself. I can't believe you'd embarrass me like this, he said loudly. You're ruining everything over appliances. Carol rushed to his side immediately, arm around his shoulders. Look what you've done, she said to me, her voice sharp. You've always been jealous of your brother. Jealous. The word didn't hurt. It felt empty. Raymond stepped forward then, voice heavy with authority. That's enough, Elise. We're your family. After everything we've done for you, you owe us this. I looked around the room. At our friends. At Caleb's parents, whose expressions had shifted from polite confusion to unmistakable disgust. This wasn't about appliances. This was about control. And for the first time in my life, I was done paying the price for peace. I met my father's eyes. No, I said quietly. The word landed harder than shouting ever could. And that was when I realized. This wasn't the end of something. It was the moment everything finally began. For a few seconds after I said that one word, no, no one moved. It was like the whole room forgot how to breathe. My father, Raymond, blinked hard, still holding the empty envelope like it had turned heavy in his hand. My mother, Carol, kept one arm around Mason, like she was bracing him against an attack that hadn't even happened. And Mason. Mason stared at me the way a person stares at a door that used to open automatically. Caleb stepped closer to me, not in front of me, but beside me. That mattered. Raymond recovered first, because he always did. He straightened his shoulders and tried to reclaim the moment. Elise, he said, voice low and warning, don't make a scene. I looked at him. Really looked at him. A scene? I repeated. You just announced my gift to someone else. He waved it off, like details were annoying. I announced what a good family does, he said. Mason is struggling. Mason wiped at his eyes, making it obvious for anyone watching. He wasn't crying because he felt bad. He was crying because the room had paused, and he needed it to move back to him. Carol's mouth tightened. You always do this, she said to me. You turn something loving into something ugly. Something in my chest stayed calm, but my hands felt cold. I didn't do anything, I said. I just didn't agree. Raymond leaned in a little, still trying to control the tone like he controlled every dinner table growing up. Caleb's parents gave those appliances, he said. That means they belong to the family. Caleb's father, Holt, made a small sound behind us. Not a laugh. More like disbelief. I'm sorry, Holt said, loud enough for people nearby to hear, but no. Those were a gift to them. Raymond turned toward Holt with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Holt, you don't understand our family, he said. We share. Holt's wife, Marin, crossed her arms. We understand stealing, she said. This looks like stealing. The word hung in the air. Stealing. Carol's face flushed. How dare you, she snapped. We are not thieves. Then Mason found his voice again, sharp and injured. I already sold my old set, he blurted, like it was proof he deserved the new one. The room shifted. Caleb's head turned slowly toward Mason. You sold your appliances, he asked. Before coming here? Mason froze. He glanced at Carol. Then at Raymond. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. And that's when I knew. This wasn't a sudden idea. This was a plan. I kept my voice simple. No big words. No drama. Mason, I said, you sold your old appliances because you expected to take ours. A few people gasped softly. Someone set down a glass too hard. I heard the clink. Carol stepped forward, eyes hard now, no warmth left. Elise, stop, she said. You're embarrassing your sibling. By telling the truth? I asked. Raymond's jaw tightened. You're twisting things, he said. We were celebrating family. I looked around our living room. At our friends who had brought gifts they could actually afford. At Caleb's parents who had driven hours to support us. At the faces of people who looked confused and uncomfortable. Then I looked back at Raymond. You didn't celebrate us, I said. You used us. Mason's voice rose, panicked now. Okay, yes, I sold them, he said fast, but I needed money. And Mom said. Carol snapped, loud and sharp. Enough. Her voice was so harsh that even Mason flinched. Raymond raised both hands as if he was calming a crowd at a meeting. Everyone, he said, forcing a laugh, this is getting dramatic. Elise is stressed. New home, new responsibilities. No, I said again. Still calm. Raymond's eyes narrowed. What do you want, Elise? He asked, like I was a child asking for attention. I didn't answer with feelings. I answered with facts. I want you to stop deciding things for me, I said. In my house. Carol's lips pressed into a thin line. Your house, she repeated, voice loaded. We helped you. We raised you. There it was. The old weapon. We raised you. Like parenting was a loan I would repay forever. Caleb spoke then, voice steady but tight. We invited you here to celebrate, he said. Not to be pressured in front of our friends. Raymond pointed at Caleb like the problem was him. You're changing her, he said. She never used to act like this. I almost smiled, because in a way, he was right. I never used to act like this. I used to stay quiet. I used to bend until I felt smaller than my own shadow. Marin, Caleb's mother, shook her head slowly. Elise isn't being changed, she said. She's being heard. That line hit me harder than anything else that night. Mason started crying again, louder now, turning to the room. I'm being punished for needing help, he said. I'm always the bad one. Carol hugged him and glared at me. Look at him, she hissed. Look what you're doing. Raymond stepped closer to me, lowering his voice like a private threat. Fix this, he said. Apologize. Let it go. We'll talk later. I met his eyes. No, I said. You always say later. Later never comes. Raymond's face hardened. Then you're choosing to hurt your family. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just reached for the doorknob and opened the front door wide. Cold air rushed in. The sound of the street. A car passing. Real life. I looked at all three of them, Raymond, Carol, Mason. This is my home, I said. You don't get to take from it. Carol stared at me like she couldn't believe I was holding a boundary. Raymond's voice dropped into something ugly. You're ungrateful, he said. After everything. Caleb moved beside me like a wall that didn't need to shout. He simply existed, solid and quiet. I held the door open wider. Please leave, I said. The room was so still I could hear the refrigerator hum again. Marin and Holt stepped back, giving space. Our friends looked away, uncomfortable but not on their side. Not anymore. Raymond grabbed Carol's elbow, not gently. Come on, he muttered. Carol pulled Mason with her. Mason didn't look at me. He kept his face hidden like he was the victim. They walked out. They had to walk past our guests. Past Caleb's parents. Past the home we paid for. And when the door finally closed behind them, the silence that remained wasn't shame. It was relief. Caleb exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for years. Are you okay? He asked quietly. I stared at the locked door. I don't know yet, I admitted. But I'm not going back. That night, after the last guest left, Caleb and I stood in the kitchen. The new appliances sat there like normal objects again, not prizes in a fight. Caleb took my hands. They will come back, he said. They'll try to make you feel guilty. I nodded. I know, I said. But this time, they'll be talking to a door that doesn't open. And I meant it. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. For a few seconds, I didn't know why my chest felt tight. Then memory rushed back in sharp, clear pieces, the toast, the envelope, the door opening, my voice saying leave. I sat up slowly, listening. No phone buzzing. No angry messages. No guilt-filled voicemails. Just quiet. Caleb was still asleep beside me, one arm stretched across the bed like he was guarding something precious. I watched him breathe and felt a strange mix of gratitude and grief. Gratitude for the life we were building. Grief for the version of myself that had believed peace meant obedience. I slipped out of bed and padded into the kitchen. The appliances were still there. The refrigerator hummed softly, steady and unbothered. I pressed my hand against its cool surface, grounding myself. Last night hadn't been a dream. I had finally said no, and the world hadn't ended. At 8:14 a.m. my phone buzzed. Raymond. I didn't answer. A minute later, another buzz. Carol. Still no. Then a text appeared, long enough that I could see the preview without opening it. We need to talk about what happened last night. This was inappropriate and hurtful. Inappropriate. Not wrong. Not unfair. Just inconvenient. I set the phone face down and made coffee. By the time Caleb came into the kitchen, dressed and quiet, I'd already decided something important. I wasn't going to argue anymore. I wasn't going to defend my memory, my feelings, or my reality. I think they'll escalate, Caleb said gently, watching my face. I know, I replied. They always do when control slips. Right on cue, the messages started stacking. Raymond, you embarrassed us in front of everyone. Carol, your sibling is devastated. Raymond, this could have been handled privately. Carol, you've always had trouble with jealousy. There it was again. Jealousy, the word they used whenever I refused to disappear. I finally replied. One sentence. I'm not discussing this. Please respect our space. The typing bubbles appeared immediately. Raymond called. I let it ring. Carol called. I let it ring. Then Mason sent a message. I didn't want it to go like that. You didn't have to humiliate me. I stared at that one longer. Because that's how this always worked. They took. I resisted. Then I became the villain. I typed back slowly. You humiliated yourself when you planned to take something that wasn't yours. No reply came after that. At noon, there was a knock at the door. Not loud. Not polite. Insistent. Caleb looked at me. Do you want me to answer? I shook my head. I will. When I opened the door, Carol stood there alone. No Raymond. No Mason. Just her, eyes red, face tight, holding a bakery box like a peace offering. I brought muffins, she said softly. Your favorite. They weren't my favorite. They were Mason's. I didn't invite you, I said calmly. She flinched like I'd slapped her. I'm your parent, she said. I don't need an invitation. This is my home, I replied. You do. Her mouth trembled. She shifted tactics instantly. I didn't sleep, she whispered. Your sibling is barely functioning. Raymond is furious. You tore the family apart over machines. I leaned against the doorframe. It wasn't about machines, I said. It was about you deciding my things weren't mine. She shook her head. You've always been sensitive. No, I said. I've always been convenient. That landed. Carol's eyes hardened. So that's it, she asked. You're cutting us off. I'm setting boundaries, I answered. You taught me that word. I just didn't realize it applied to you. She scoffed. Boundaries are for unhealthy relationships. I almost laughed. Exactly. Her voice rose. You're punishing us. I'm protecting myself. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. You think you're strong now, she said. But you'll regret this. Family is all you have. I looked past her, at the quiet street, the neighbors walking dogs, life moving on without our drama. No, I said gently. Family is who treats you with respect. She stared at me for a long moment, searching for the daughter who used to fold. She didn't find her. You've changed, she said coldly. Yes, I agreed. And I'm proud of it. I stepped back and closed the door. I didn't slam it. I locked it. The fallout came fast after that. Extended relatives started reaching out. People who hadn't called me in years suddenly had opinions. Your parents are heartbroken. You should be the bigger person. Mason is struggling. Blood matters. I stopped responding altogether. That evening, Caleb's parents invited us over for dinner. Not to talk. Not to fix anything. Just to sit and eat and exist without tension. At the table, Marin reached over and squeezed my hand. You didn't do anything wrong, she said. Some families only survive by sacrificing one person. When that person stops, the whole structure shakes. I swallowed hard. I didn't realize how much I was holding up, I admitted. Holt nodded. They noticed the moment you stopped. On the drive home, my phone buzzed again. A message from Raymond. If you don't apologize, don't expect things to go back to how they were. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I typed back the truth I'd finally learned to say. That's the point. I turned the phone off. That night, I slept deeper than I had in years. Not because everything was resolved, but because for the first time, I wasn't bracing for the next demand. The following days brought a strange mix of quiet and noise. The quiet came from my own life. Mornings without dread. Evenings without rehearsing explanations in my head. I cooked meals without checking my phone. I laughed without guilt. I noticed how tense my shoulders had been for decades, and how slowly they were lowering now. The noise came from everywhere else. A cousin I barely knew sent a long message about family unity. An aunt wrote that Carol was sick with worry. Someone else implied I was cruel for choosing comfort over blood. I didn't reply to any of it. Instead, I did something small but symbolic. I opened a new document on my laptop and titled it Boundaries. Not a letter. Not an explanation. Just a list. No financial help without written agreement. No surprise visits. No public decisions made about my belongings. No conversations that include insults disguised as concern. No triangulation through relatives. Looking at it made my hands shake, not from fear, but from the realization that none of these were unreasonable. They only felt extreme to people who benefited from me having none. 3 days later, Mason tried a different approach. They showed up. No warning. No text. Just a knock. Caleb was at work. I stood in the hallway, listening, heart steady but alert. When I opened the door, Mason looked smaller. No confidence. No performance. Just irritation mixed with panic. "You really went nuclear," they said. "No," I replied. "I went honest." They scoffed. "You humiliated me." I met their eyes. "You planned to take something that didn't belong to you. In front of witnesses." "That was Mom's idea," Mason snapped. "She said you'd fold like always." There it was. Out in the open. "You sold your appliances before the party," I said calmly. "You expected mine." Mason's jaw tightened. "So what? You could afford them." I felt something settle in my chest. Not anger. Finality. "This conversation is over," I said. "And you need to leave." Mason laughed once, sharp and hollow. "You think you're better than us now?" "No," I said. "I think I'm done paying for you." Their expression shifted, fear flashing behind the defiance. "You'll regret this," they said. "Mom will never forgive you." I shrugged. "That's her choice." They stepped back slowly, like someone realizing a bridge had burned behind them. As I closed the door, I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. That weekend, Caleb and I changed the locks. Not because I thought anyone would break in, but because I needed my body to understand what my mind already had. This space was safe. This life was mine. The story didn't end with an apology. There wasn't one. What came instead was distance, and with it, clarity. I started therapy. I learned words for things I'd lived with my whole life: scapegoating, parentification, normalized exploitation. I learned that being the strong one often just means being the most convenient one to sacrifice. Weeks passed. Then months. The messages slowed. Then stopped. And one quiet evening, standing in my kitchen with the refrigerator humming softly behind me, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for understanding. Not for regret. Not for permission. I had already given myself what they never would. The quiet didn't disappear. It deepened. At first, I kept expecting something to break it, a call in the middle of the night, an emergency that would somehow become my responsibility again. That was the pattern I'd been trained for. Calm always came with a price. Silence always meant something was being prepared behind the scenes. But days passed. Then weeks. Nothing happened. And that was when I understood how much of my life had been built around reacting instead of living. With the noise gone, memories started surfacing. Not the dramatic ones, the small, ordinary moments that had once felt insignificant but now revealed the pattern I'd been blind to. Like the way my achievements were always acknowledged quietly, if at all. Like how Mason's mistakes were framed as growing pains, while my boundaries were framed as attitude. Like how generosity was expected from me, but gratitude was never required from them. In therapy, I said it out loud for the first time. I was never the favorite. I was the solution. My therapist nodded, not surprised. "Families like that don't reward strength," she said. "They consume it." That sentence followed me home. A month after the housewarming disaster, an envelope arrived. No return address. Inside was a short note, written in careful handwriting. "We need to talk. This has gone too far." It was signed by Carol. Not an apology. Not accountability. A negotiation. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, but because I was finally listening to myself. Then something unexpected happened. People started telling me the truth. A friend of my mother's ran into me at the grocery store. She hesitated, then said quietly, "I always wondered how you stayed so calm." Now I realize you were just surviving. Another guest from the party messaged me weeks later. I didn't say anything that night, but what they did was wrong. You handled it with more grace than they deserved. Even one of Mason's former roommates reached out, awkwardly admitting she tried the same thing with me once. I didn't know it was a pattern. Each message felt like a small stone being lifted off my chest. I wasn't imagining it. I hadn't exaggerated. I wasn't cruel. I had just stopped cooperating. At home, life grew quieter and richer. Caleb and I cooked together. We made plans that didn't involve managing anyone else's emotions. We hosted friends without fear that someone would hijack the room. Laughter felt different when it wasn't followed by guilt. One night, while washing dishes, Caleb said, "You smile more now." I paused. "I feel lighter," I admitted. "Like I'm not carrying a role anymore." He nodded. "You never needed one." Then, 3 months later, the email arrived. Subject line, family meeting, important. It was from my father. Brief. Formal. Careful. They wanted to clear the air. I didn't delete it right away. I sat with it. What surprised me wasn't the temptation to go, it was how small that temptation felt. Like a habit losing its grip. After a long moment, I replied with a single sentence. I'm open to communication when accountability is part of the conversation. No accusations. No explanations. Just a boundary. The response came 2 days later. "We don't see things the way you do." That told me everything. I didn't answer again. What followed wasn't dramatic. It was something far more powerful. Consistency. I didn't explain myself to extended relatives. I didn't defend my choices. I didn't chase understanding from people invested in misunderstanding me. And slowly, the narrative they tried to build collapsed under its own weight. Because without my reactions, there was nothing left to fuel it. One afternoon, while organizing a closet, I found the empty envelope I'd handed my mother that night. I held it for a moment. Then I threw it away. Not out of anger. But because I didn't need the symbol anymore. The real change had already happened. I used to think strength meant enduring whatever was asked of me. Now I know it means choosing myself, even when no one claps for it. Especially then. The first real test came when the silence stopped being quiet and started being strategic. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday. No warning. No build-up. Just a notification from a number I hadn't blocked yet, one of those distant relatives who only appeared when conflict turned into gossip. I heard things got really ugly. "Your parents are devastated." I stared at the message longer than I expected to. Not because it hurt, but because it was familiar. This was how pressure had always been reapplied in my family. Never directly. Never honestly. Always through concern, through just checking in, through people who thought neutrality meant repeating one side's pain and calling it balance. I typed, deleted, typed again. Then I put the phone down. For the first time, I didn't feel obligated to explain myself to someone who hadn't lived my life. A week later, my father showed up at my workplace. He didn't come inside. He waited across the street, leaning against his car like a man unsure whether he still had the right to knock. I saw him through the glass doors. Old reflexes kicked in. My chest tightened. My mind raced through scenarios, accusations, guilt, raised voices. But none of that happened. Because I didn't go out. I stayed at my desk. And after 10 minutes, he left. That moment stayed with me longer than any argument ever had. Not because it was dramatic, but because it wasn't. For the first time, I had chosen not to engage, and the world didn't collapse. That night, he left a voicemail. His voice was calm, practiced. He talked about misunderstandings. About how emotions had run high. About how families go through phases. He never mentioned the appliances. He never mentioned the plan. He never mentioned the lie. What he did say was this. "Your mother hasn't been sleeping." There it was. The familiar hook. I listened to the message twice. Then I deleted it. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood that concern had always been used as leverage. Around that time, Mason resurfaced online. Not directly. Never directly. She posted vague messages about betrayal. About being forced to start over. About how some people confuse boundaries with cruelty. Strangers defended her. Friends of friends praised her resilience. Once, someone tagged me. I didn't respond. But someone else did. A guest from the party commented, calmly and publicly, "I was there. This isn't what happened." The comment stayed up. So did the silence that followed. I started noticing changes in myself. Small ones. I slept through the night. I stopped rehearsing conversations in my head. I didn't flinch when my phone buzzed. At work, my focus sharpened. Without emotional exhaustion draining me, I had energy left for creativity. I took on a new project. It led to a promotion I hadn't even realized I'd been holding myself back from pursuing. When my manager congratulated me, I cried in the bathroom afterward, not out of overwhelm, but out of disbelief. I had space to grow. One evening, while cleaning the garage, Caleb found an old box labeled family in my handwriting. We opened it together. Inside were photos, letters, keepsakes, evidence of years I had spent trying to earn a sense of belonging. I expected sadness. What I felt instead was clarity. These aren't bad memories, Caleb said gently. They're just, unfinished. I nodded. They don't get to define me anymore. We kept the photos that felt honest. We let the rest go. The final attempt came 6 months later. A holiday invitation. Formal. Polite. Carefully worded. We would like to move forward. Let's put the past behind us. No apology. No acknowledgement. No change. Just expectation. I read it once. Then I wrote back. I'm open to rebuilding when there's accountability, respect, and clear boundaries. Until then, I wish you well. I sent it without shaking. That was how I knew I was done. I used to believe closure came from conversations. Now I know it comes from consistency. From choosing the same boundary over and over, even when no one applauds it. Even when it's inconvenient. Even when it costs you the version of family you wished you had. Some losses are necessary. Not because you failed, but because you finally stopped abandoning yourself. The last shift didn't come with a confrontation. It came quietly, the way real change usually does. It came the day I stopped checking whether they had responded. Not out of spite. Not out of fear. But because I genuinely forgot. It was early spring when I realized it. The house felt lived in now, not staged, not defended. Just ours. The refrigerator hummed in the background like it always had, no longer a symbol of conflict, just an appliance doing its job. The new locks clicked softly when I turned the key, no longer dramatic, just routine. I was standing at the kitchen counter, barefoot, sunlight cutting across the floor, when the thought crossed my mind. They haven't crossed my thoughts all day. That realization landed gently, like something setting down its weight after a long carry. A few weeks later, I ran into an old family friend at the grocery store. She looked hesitant when she recognized me, like she wasn't sure which version of the story I belonged to. I heard things, she said carefully. I smiled, not tight, not defensive. Just calm. Most people did. She studied my face, then nodded slowly. You seem lighter. I thanked her. And meant it. Life didn't become perfect after that. It became honest. There were moments, birthdays, holidays, when old habits tried to resurface. When the absence felt louder simply because it used to be filled with noise. But the ache wasn't sharp anymore. It was informational. It reminded me why I'd chosen distance. And each time, I chose it again. Mason eventually stopped posting. Her fundraiser disappeared. The sympathy thinned. People moved on. Entitlement doesn't age well without an audience. I didn't watch closely. I didn't need to. One evening, Caleb asked me a question that stopped me cold. If they came back tomorrow, he said, apologized sincerely, respected boundaries, would you want a relationship? I thought about it longer than I expected. Then I answered honestly. I don't know. But I don't need the answer right now. And that was the point. For the first time, my future didn't hinge on their behavior. I started doing things just because I wanted to. I hosted dinners without anxiety. I invited friends without rehearsing explanations. I said no without preparing a defense. I learned that peace doesn't announce itself, it settles in slowly, like dust in an undisturbed room. Months later, a message arrived from my other parent. Short. Direct. No theatrics. I handled things badly. I see that now. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know. I read it twice. Then I replied. I appreciate you saying that. Nothing more. No reopening. No rehashing. No bargaining. Just acknowledgement. And that was enough. The truth is, cutting contact didn't make me cruel. It made me precise. It taught me the difference between connection and access. Between love and obligation. Between generosity and self-erasure. I didn't lose my family that night. I lost the role they had assigned me. And that loss made room for something better. Now, when I think back to that moment, the fork clinking against the glass, the applause for generosity I never offered, I don't feel anger. I feel gratitude. Because that was the moment the mask slipped. The moment the system exposed itself. The moment I finally chose myself without apology. If you're reading this and something feels uncomfortably familiar, hear this clearly. You are not selfish for protecting your peace. You are not cruel for refusing exploitation. You are not weak for walking away. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop participating in a story that only works when you stay silent. I didn't burn bridges. I stopped standing on them while they set them on fire. And on the other side of that choice, I found something better than approval. I found myself. Thank you for watching the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Have a nice day.